Hello, our guest on this edition of Life Stories is Andrew Lound from Birmingham, who for nearly 40 years has been presenting lectures and exhibitions on space science, astronomy, the ill-fated liner Titanic, and nearer to home, the history of our industrial heritage in the West Midlands. Andrew's lecture tours have taken him all over the world, so now a very warm welcome to Andrew, back in the West Midlands today. Andrew, we first met when we were working together on a film called Children on the Titanic a few years ago, or for the 100 years anniversary. And I was amazed then at the knowledge and the detailed knowledge that you had, and also some of the secrets that you were alluding to. So I want to talk about that a little bit later. But you've told me today that you've been giving lectures and presentations for nearly 40 years. You don't look old enough.
That's very kind of you to say so. Yes, my first presentation, I was 9, and it came out, that's a public presentation, it came out in a strange way. We didn't do astronomy, generally speaking, at school officially. There was no official astronomy thing, and I was into astronomy at the time. So I gave a small presentation to a group of school children. And one of the school children's fathers actually worked at Newtown Community Centre. And he said, would you be prepared to do that for a group of adults? So when you're 9, yes, of course I'll do that for a group of adults.
And you weren't nervous about that?
I never gave it much of a thought, really. I just thought it was just, I have knowledge. If I have some knowledge, as you share it. So therefore it was simple as that, really. And the old Hanemax projector came out, and there we go. It started there, really.
And you've been lecturing and giving talks and stimulating ideas, and
ever since,
having
really.
conspiracy theories sometimes.
It sort of rolled and developed constantly after that, because one of the things I did notice, I used to go to presentations by various people, and I did notice that we had very exciting subjects being murdered by poor presentation. And I thought, you know, something needs to be slightly different to this. And then I started to develop my own little bit of style and things, and I was adding little bits of music into it, and then dressing differently rather than the tweed jacket.
I must say, you're a picture of sartorial elegance in
Yes, I like to try
Edwardian clothes. Are they Edwardian?
Well, it's sort of a mixture, really, yes, but it just has more of an Edwardian style. You've got more of a 18th century style waistcoat dealing with it, really. But
it looks very nice.
I prefer that anyway. It's actually my own clothes now. I tend to go around wearing these type of clothes, more interesting.
So it really gets you into character for your talks.
That's a good point, because that's absolutely right. One of the reasons people have a suit, a business suit for work, a uniform when you're in the military, it's putting you in that frame of mind to do what you do. And therefore my costume puts me in the frame of mind for the particular presentation I do.
Smart idea. So, back in the 1970s, when you were beginning your lifetime so far of lectures, you were in Aston, Birmingham.
Yes.
What was it like in the 70s?
It was under a great deal of change going on there. They started to remove some of the great old buildings, which even at the time I thought was very sad, because I quite liked the older buildings, and replace them with new ones. For a child, for me, it was a very exciting time growing up anyway, because I had a great deal of influence from my parents, who were very keen to get me involved in it as much as possible, which was quite good fun. And although many kids just simply went out and played football all the time, I generally started to do other things. I tended to want to explore and investigate things, and spent a lot of time in museums and art galleries. And that was a time of great discovery. And you had the great old library in Aston, a fantastic building.
I remember that library in Aston.
Yeah. And I spent a lot of time in that library in Aston going through things. And there were quite instances where young children would come to ask if I was going out to play, and I'd be telling my mother, tell them I'm out. And the reason why I wanted them out is because I had a pile of books to deal with, which I was more interested in. I'd found something new I wanted to explore. So growing up in Aston was quite exciting, in the sense it was a period of my discovery while Aston was changing. And I didn't know it until years later when I look back. Probably my explorations and Aston changing almost merged together. In fact, it was development of both myself and of the region.
That's the period when a lot of people were moving out to the suburbs, into high-rise buildings.
It was, and we ourselves didn't stay there all that long in the end. I mean, we moved in the end to Great Bar, so we came out of the area there.
Gosh, I remember Aston Cross. I worked there for many years with Nature's Gasworks not far away, Ansell's Brewery, the HP sauce factory.
Absolutely.
And when a certain weather condition and all the aromas, let's call them, to be polite, came together. It was fantastic. It was quite a rich cocktail. I actually liked it. It was quite a rich cocktail.
Aston Cross was a fantastic. If you remember, Aston Cross was such a thriving area for shops. You had the big old Woolworths there at one time, of course, which was quite fantastic.
Look, I tell you what. Let's take a picture. Take a look at a picture of you as a lad. You are. Very early interest in astronomy.
Yes.
So the young Andrew Lound. As you move on, and you've started your lectures at the age of 9, let's take a look at what comes up next. So this is moving to the present day, probably.
Yes, you can see.
And here you are as a World War I soldier?
Yes, Tommy Atkins, which is a generic character for a presentation I do called The Odyssey of Tommy Atkins. It takes a generic soldier's view of going through the First World War. And there's two versions of it. There's a single version, and there's what's called a duo presentation where I am with a lady who plays his wife, Alice Atkins. And it's an interesting exercise because there's all the uniform, there's all the clothing to change through while he's going through his period. And there are 5 different types of hats that soldiers ended up with throughout the war, which is quite staggering. And you get a real feel when you're wearing the uniform of how soldiers were, because it's the clothes. I mean, there's various actresses and talk about it's the shoes. An actor may say, it's the trousers. It is the clothing. It changes everything. It changed my persona doing the presentation of how you behave is dictated by the clothing.
Well, this goes back to your point earlier on that if you get into character, you can almost feel you're surrounded by history.
You do.
And probably thinking about the kind of foods the food that you'd have been eating.
Absolutely.
The smell of the trenches.
This is it. And the type of equipment you're going to use, of course, smoking was critical because everybody smoked, so you're having to smoke. You're not really smoking, you're faking it, but you still have the cigarette, you still have to know how to light that cigarette, how they used to dab it down, how the hand is nice and steady when he started in the war, and then as the letters, because it's all about letters being written by himself to his wife, and then how he starts to shake during the present day. And it's very interesting. You start to feel it very strongly.
Let's take a look at your next picture from the album. And here you are as an officer on the Titanic. Now that, if I'm not mistaken, is the chain being pulled.
That's the central anchor.
The central anchor being pulled
through Netherton with the 20 horses, which he didn't need, but he had 20 horses anyway.
This links back to the incredible involvement that the Midlands had in the Titanic and the building of the Titanic.
Far more than anybody can imagine. About 70% of the interior fittings were made in Birmingham and the Black Country.
We'll return to your theories on the Titanic later. Let's take a look at the next picture from your album. And this is you being very theatrical, and I guess it's space travel, is it?
Yes, it is. It's a full Gothic outfit, as I'm talking. In that particular case, it's a story of space exploration there, yes, because I recognise the image at the back, which we take from a historical point of view all the way up to modern day. And of course, got this nice Gothic outfit on, so then it's very dramatic and lively. And that's quite important, because if you sit there just to give what was termed a lecture, it doesn't necessarily involve the audience very well. And I think that's absolutely important, that they feel as if they're both being entertained as well as being informed. And you reach a point where they're learning and not realising it. They're taking information in, and because we're a very visual species, the visuals are the cues to their learning. And they may actually then suddenly associate some piece of information I've given them with a mannerism, with something dramatic I've actually performed in front of them, and it sticks. So it's all theatre, and you can do it. It's not an invention for my mind by any stretch of the imagination. It goes back an awful long way. Sir Robert Ball was doing this kind of thing way back in the 19th century. And if we go back to the 18th century, people like James Ferguson were doing it on their tours of Britain about science.
So you've taken it right from the very early scientists, excuse me, who were looking at space and astronomy and how it might be explored. You go right through the journeys that we've had to the moon and unmanned journeys elsewhere, and I think you can predict about the future as well.
Yes, I mean, there's an element where we see where we're going to the next generation, where we've got private enterprise. The Virgin Galactic is a good example of that, and private enterprise is going to play more and more in a role in spaceflight now, with governments like the United States actually contracting out the launching of astronauts to space stations, and the government concentrating on further afield. And that's where it's going to go. We're going to see more private enterprise, more commercialisation of space.
In a few moments, we'll be talking more about the Titanic in particular, because I know you've got a lot to tell us about that. And also a view of what historians will be saying about how we're living today in this year later. So that's after the break. Welcome back. I'm talking to historian Andrew Lound, who lectures on astronomy, the Titanic, local history and space travel. His lectures take him all over the world, but today he's earthbound in the Life Stories studio. Now, I know you've got a master's degree, haven't you, in astronomy, but a lot of your knowledge is self-taught.
Yes. I mean, there's only so far you can go with formal education, because there's so many areas where you need to get into, and you find that one subject leads to another. And since I was a child, I've always amassed massive quantities of books. I have just over 19,000 books.
Gosh.
And thousands of manuscripts and things at home, which I can use for reference material, which is fun.
A big storage problem as well.
It's a big storage problem and an indexing issue, of course, because they have to be indexed correctly, so I can actually find everything, which is quite useful. Disciplines you to a certain degree.
So you say you've got nearly 20,000 books, but is there anybody who's inspired you in any of your subjects?
Yes, I mean Carl Sagan is the big influence, really, in many
I think we've got a picture of him, haven't we? Yes.
Yeah.
So tell us about Carl Sagan.
Carl Sagan was the great populariser, and probably the greatest populariser of space science ever. I mean, his TV series Cosmos was such a groundbreaking event. It's just fantastic. When I was a late teenager, Carl Sagan gave the Christmas lectures in London, the Royal Society Christmas lectures, and this was always televised. And I saw this, and this was a revelation. Here was a man, great scientist, known for his science, presenting lectures in a very different way, which is what I liked anyway, very dramatic, speaking in a way which is very different, in a much more, not look at me, I'm a great scientist, but actually talking with the audience, not just to them, which was quite important. And he covered all aspects of it. He looked at the history of the subject, and he looked then at where we're going now, and even speculated on the future. And I thought this was absolutely fantastic, and this was a revelation, because he was speaking in a way that I was thinking. And I was very fortunate then, a few years later, to end up working with, and still do, with the Planetary Society, an organisation he founded in 1979.
Excellent, yes. And you met him?
Yes, I have, yes. I met him on a couple of occasions, yes.
And so obviously his style, his lecture style, it really helped you, presumably, with the way that you...
It did, because the problem in the UK, generally speaking, in the period of the late 70s and 80s, there was a rigid way almost of presenting a presentation. And if you did it outside of that, you were shunned upon, and you were told you weren't doing it the right way. Here was a man, a great scientist, international person, doing it the way I thought it should be done. And I thought, well, wait a minute. Maybe I'm not the wrong person that's wrong here. Maybe I'm okay. And that was important to me.
And of course that went on, as I now know, to the fact that you were headhunted to go and talk all over the world, including Libya.
Yes, Libya was a fantastic opportunity. The British Council invited me over in 2005 to give a presentation about the planet Saturn and Britain's role in planet Saturn research with the Cassini spacecraft and the Huygens spacecraft. But I did actually point out at the time when I was in Libya, you do realise there's a total eclipse of the sun here next year.
No, they didn't know very much
Well,
about
the British Council weren't aware of that, really. I said, well, yeah. Well, I said, you've got a country here who's going to be the centre line for the great eclipse in the middle of the desert. And I said, you're going to have young people who want to look at it. I said, they need to have proper eye protection. Here's an opportunity for a good public awareness programme. So they said, leave it with us. And then they came back and said, right, 1, can you organise a series of presentations to go to schools, colleges and universities? 2, can you organise how we can do a public awareness campaign? 3, can you bring a science team over to do the research? Simple as that. And the answer was yes, yes and yes. And so I organised a science team which came from Britain and Poland, a joint science team, so we could do proper science, working with Libyan scientists in the desert. Plus I went around to the various different schools. I had a translator with me, which was quite a fantastic experience. And one of the most amazing events ever was at a girls' school, an Islamic girls' school. I walk in, and all the girls are sitting there, and behind me there's a chalkboard, and on this chalkboard they've placed this beautiful illustration, beautiful Arabic writing, beautiful colours, beautiful illustration of how eclipses really are. I thought, oh, that's good, I'll refer to that. So I'm doing the presentation, I'm speaking away, it's being translated, and then I suddenly say, oh, a perfect example of an eclipse is seen on this board here. And all the girls go, ooh. And I look at the translator and I go, what's happened? And he said, you've just praised the Prophet Muhammad. The words are from the Prophet Muhammad, which and you explained correctly what eclipses were. And I couldn't do anything wrong in that school at that point after that. Absolutely magnificent. But having that, again, this is important here. The historical knowledge was quite important there, that I was familiar with Islamic astronomy. And pointing out Islamic astronomy is actually the astronomy that came to the West to educate us here. And that's why I thought it was quite interesting going back to Islamic schools. And these people hadn't done much astronomy.
So at that time, the Foreign Office must have been very pleased with you, I should imagine.
It was a good day, and we had a very, very good weekend in. Of course, we got to see the eclipse, which is utterly fantastic.
We've got a picture here.
Yeah, I mean, that's the diamond ring effect, just as the eclipse is finishing, where it looks like a diamond ring. 6-minute eclipse, absolutely fantastic experience, and the sights we saw in Libya were absolutely amazing.
Well done for that, Andrew. Now let's get back into the studio and take a look at 2 or 3 things that you kindly brought in. This book was given to you when you were a child.
Yes, it was. As I said, at Great Yarmouth, I asked a question about where did the moon come from, and I was interested in astronomy.
Lovely cover.
Oh, it's
if
beautiful.
you want to hold it up to the...
Yes, it's beautiful, really.
Yeah.
And
a little higher.
my father asked me, I went to his boss and said, my son's getting interested in astronomy, what should we do? And being an old family, he actually gave my father this book. And it's by Sir Robert Ball, called Starland, and it's a series of lectures from Sir Robert Ball to young people to get them interested in astronomy, originally 1899. And that was it. Starts from there. That's the point.
So that helped you accelerate onwards.
That fantastic book.
Then moving ahead to when you'd seen the movie The Night to Remember, the classic black and white movie that I think inspired a lot of people to take a big interest in the Titanic. And here in the studio, and if I may pick it up,
help yourself.
And hand it over to you and hold it up to the camera. That is a piece of the Titanic. Now, how do you come to have a piece of the Titanic?
Well, I have friends in Boston, USA, and when they brought up about 1 ton piece of the hull in the 1990s, it was going to go to Boston. So I went to visit my friends, and I watched this huge piece of ship coming on a low loader, and they transferred it onto another roller system to get it into the museum. But of course, it hadn't been treated, so sections of this hull are all falling off into the street. And everybody follows this piece of metal into the museum. And I'm standing in the street and lying on the ground are pieces of the hull of the Titanic. Well, you have to pick them up, don't you?
Goodness me.
They'd only get washed in the gutter.
So quite a few people have got pieces of the hull of
Well,
the
everybody just followed it in. I just grabbed the bits that was falling on the ground.
That's incredible.
I couldn't
it's
resist
just,
it.
I touch it again because I think
Yes.
it's amazing when you touch history, and that's come from the bottom of the Atlantic.
It has. I mean, the plating that it comes from, of course, is about this thick. So you can actually see it sort of slices through as it disintegrates. I had pieces of it tested, interesting, very high sulfur content, which confirms really what the other experts have actually checked anyway, which I don't think contributed to the disaster as much as many people suggest. But
Now, I know that you've done many television programmes on the Titanic, but I think we've got time for just one theory, that there were more children on the Titanic than the official statistics
I go along
detail.
I go along with that, because what you tended to find is, certainly in the engine rooms, the boiler rooms, the boiler men would bring their young sons with them to start learning the trade, and sometimes they were even smuggled on board. They weren't necessarily already went through the right channels to get on board. You've also got people who always lie about their age. I mean, this is really coming out now in the First World War, I think, as much as anything, how many children actually volunteered for the armed forces and actually got through into the system, weren't discovered till maybe even a year or two later and had to be immediately discharged. But this was common in the merchant marine, and I think on the Titanic we definitely saw this going on. The bellboys were certainly young, but I think we see that in other parts of the ship as well.
So the bellboys, what, 13, 14?
Yeah, 14 years old, I think, quite easily, and probably a bit, I think one of them was certainly 13. And certainly I know one of the trimmers, whose age is down to 17 years old. There is no way that young man was 17 years old. No way at all. He had to be
So
a
it's a
lot younger.
combination of fathers taking their sons onto the ship to work in the boilers, on the boilers,
Yeah.
the bellboys, the young waiters. So there's quite
You're
a
gonna
few
get
young
up.
teenagers.
It was very, and although we're highlighting this with Titanic, this was very common in industry across the Midlands as well.
Now, I know that you'll be talking about this kind of subject a great deal on a new TV series coming up called Doorstep Histories and a Few Secrets, and also about how people will be looking back in a couple of 100 years' time,
Yes.
looking at history as it is today. But just now for this programme, in Life Stories, fascinating, Andrew. The best of luck with your lecture tours as
Thank
you
you.
continue. And thank you for joining us and telling
Thank you
us
for having
your
me.
life story.